It's been more than a week, and I'm still in a state of shock. The conversations range from what's wrong with him to how he's doing. And millions on social media are sharing thoughts, memes, and anger over the slap seen around the globe. But at the core is the institutional rage Black men have and continue to take out on one another, this time for the entire world to see. So where do we go from here? The conversation coming up next on The PowerPLAY Show.
From the studios at Hullbait Productions, this is Season 3 of The PowerPLAY Show. Now, here's Tonya McGrath.
We've dissected the joke.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay.
And what came next?
Uh-oh, Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
News from the Academy, what they're now saying about actor Will Smith after that stunning moment at the Oscars.
A slap that is still reverberating through the entertainment world and beyond.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Scientists said in a statement today that it condemns Smith's actions and has launched a formal review.
And heard as the world chimed in.
People make mistakes all the time.
Let me just say this.
As a comedian, come on, King.
I'm telling you right now, slap one of the kings.
Yeah.
We gonna have to immediately go to commercial break.
There's been a lot of attention given to Will's mindset that night. The night that there's a lot of attention given to what it must have driven him to this.
Welcome to the PowerPLAY Show. I'm Tonya McGrath. Perhaps Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote it best. With a single petulant blow, he advocated violence, diminished women, insulted the entertainment industry, and perpetuated stereotypes about the Black community. My guests today are here to continue the conversation everyone has been having. Attorney Joseph Feaster and filmmaker and producer Calvin Lindsay, welcome to the PowerPLAY Show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Tonya.
Thank you.
I want to start with your first reaction to what happened at the Oscars when you first witnessed the slap. Attorney Feaster, I'll start with you.
Well, first and foremost, I haven't watched the Oscars in years for a whole host of reasons, but more importantly, there was the news flash on the program that I was watching as if this major event had taken place. And, my initial reaction was, I laughed at the joke. And then my reaction was, well, what did he say? And then Will walked up on the stage and, slapped him. And my initial reaction was, hey, he just disrespected his wife. And, where I grew up in New York, whether it's your wife, girlfriend, or any other woman, you do that. That was my initial reaction. And I'll leave it there because that wasn't the reaction I had after I thought about it. And I know you're going to want to follow up on that, Tonya. So I'll leave it. That was my initial reaction. It was like, yo, the brother did the right thing in terms of protecting his woman. Would I've handled it in that way? Maybe not before 1 million people, but I said that was the right thing. That was my initial visceral reaction.
And Calvin, what was yours?
Well, my initial reaction was shock. I thought, well, maybe this was like a bit. I thought maybe it was like a comedy bit. But once I saw that it was a real thing that was happening, my initial thought and interesting, like the first word that jumped into my head when I thought about it was that I just thought it was so performative on Will Smith's part. I was really, I was like, oh, come on, man. I just thought it was like really performative. And I've kind of stayed there, and I know we'll kind of get into more of this, but performative, that was where I started.
I can't help but think this all kind of just heightens the stereotype of Black men being prone to violence and unable to control their emotions, no matter how successful they become. As you started to digest this more and more, talk about some of the thoughts that you were feeling as a Black man and witnessing one black man slapping another black man. Calvin, I'll just start with you this time.
One of the early conversations that I had was, I was like, wow, this guy just set us back a long way. For all of the reasons that you listed earlier. I mean, and I could just imagine. I mean, and I was thinking, I was just imagining a lot of the Hollywood executives driving home, sitting in their limos, looking over at each other like, "See, I told you." And it was interesting. One of the because obviously I was getting phone calls like mad. And it was actually meant to be funny, but it was, there's so much truth in jest. And someone had called me, and the first thing they said, "See, this is why we can't have nice things," and that just kind of resonated around the whole issue.
Attorney?
Well, before I answer that question, because I have to say I respectfully disagree. As we say in my profession in the law, we agree to disagree, but not be disagreeable. Right. But let me get back to the point earlier that I was alluding to, Tonya and to Calvin. My initial reaction was that, but then when I listened to exactly how Chris Rock presented it and what he said, I had to scratch my head as to where did I see the offense against Jada. So, hey, like I said, I'm of that mindset of protecting in terms of a woman. And I'll say it now that Ted Cruz would have been in a much better position to slap the hell out of Donald Trump the way that he spoke about his wife. So my sense is so that was my reaction, that I thought that Will overreacted. And I may have, because in situations like that, when you're dealing with gender, your wife, race, sometimes you want to pull folks to the side. So I may have dealt with it in the green room and said, yo, brother, I don't want, I know you do jokes, but just don't do any jokes about my wife. And, and you squash it and it's done. So from that standpoint, I thought it was overreaction. Will was wrong. But I'm having trouble with this sense that Will, when a black person does something, we speak for the whole race or the whole gender. Will slapped him. I didn't slap him. When I have to use Trump as the example because they're holding him up like some type of king. When he says or does certain things, they don't talk about look at all those bad white men doing types of things. So I do not go there and find if there's. And I think you have this question, this portrayal that they've done. Trump could not even trump Ukraine. This story trumped Ukraine. This story trumped the Supreme Court nomination. So my sense, I think there's even racism in the reporting to make this such a big issue. After I saw it in terms of it was no big deal in my view. So my sense is that no, Will didn't speak for the entire black male population. He was wrong. I think that if the Academy wants to deal with him, fine. And all of those reports that have come out from different things, he's resigned from the Academy. Jada is saying he shouldn't have slapped him, etc. I think he regrets it. And I do agree with Roland and a few others. I lift up Chris Rock because he handled the response in the appropriate way. But Will does not speak for Joseph Feaster anyway.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I certainly don't disagree with you, and I don't, and I mean I agree with much of what you said, but we're not talking about an issue of fairness, right? I mean the reality of the situation, and so I totally agree. I'm like, he doesn't speak for me, and he doesn't speak for all folks, but the reality of the situation is we know how this is we can see already how this is being spun. And we know how this is going to get dealt with. So that's where I was saying where, that's where we've all taken a hit. Now, is it fair? Certainly not. But the reality of the situation is that we certainly have taken a hit behind this. No pun intended.
Yeah. And, and I want to kind of get back to your comment when someone said to you, this is why we can't have nice things, because the reality is for decades, we have been thinking and protesting and commenting about the lack of diversity when it came to the Academy Awards, and even the great blackout that was, very recently, was just a few years ago. Right. So now that we have probably one of the most diverse group of nominees this year, it does kind of beg the question, like, okay, so we asked to get invited to the party, we get to the party, this happens. So what happens when we're not invited anymore? Because I have to, my instinct is telling me those kind of conversations are happening. They're not right conversations, but they're happening.
Well, this is where I said before, on the point that Calvin just made, I totally agree. The reaction is going to be, it's for one to say, see, I told you, yes, all of that's going to happen. Oh, that's the reason why we didn't want him before, we don't need him in the future. So those conversations are going to take place. But once again, I have to say, when the situation occurs in the white community, it's not treated that way. So the only response that I can give is to say, we know that, and unfortunately, we had a Black producer for the Oscars this year.
Yep, Will Packer.
We had a significant number of nominees. This overshadowed. Can you tell me who won, the Best Actress? Can you tell me who won the Best Support? I do know the answer because I paid attention, but on the most part, it reminds me of the situation where, do you remember the person who came in second place in the 100 meters? No, you don't. So, it's unfortunate that will dominate. I don't know, Calvin, you're more in the industry. Tonya, you're more in the industry to be able to know how we might be able to do some repair there. But I think that we will need to do something, because this is going to be used as an excuse in order to exclude folks in the future. And to me, that ought not to be the outcome.
Calvin, I know that people don't typically watch the Oscars, but I do believe that there was a larger audience this year because of the representation, because of Will Smith. This is the first time in his career that he had been acknowledged for his work on this level. And then, of course, we had Denzel Washington as also a fellow nominee. So I think that there was some genuine interest and probably a more diverse audience that were tuning in that night. But boy, what a disappointment to have this happen. It just, it really felt like a punch gut.
Right. And to piggyback on what the attorney was saying, the fact that it overshadowed so much, right? I mean, so Questlove, like, I have no idea what his acceptance speech was, right? Because we were all on, just trying to process and again, there's no precedent for it. There's no playbook for it in terms of processing or anything. And that's the big shame of it, right? Is that this is the story, right? But so, it's tough. And I mean, I think folks are still processing it, right? Because we had like the slap and then there's some dealing around was this really protection and that whole issue around protection. There were so many slices and like kind of day by day, we're kind of taking a different slice and kind of analyzing that piece, right?
Well, that's my next question. Where is Jada's responsibility in all this? Because as Attorney Joseph Feaster just alluded to, it's now coming out, it's now being reported. We haven't heard her say it herself, but she's regretting that Will took this action on her behalf. So where is her responsibility in all this?
I guess that's the $1 million question, right? For me, I do not put this in. I don't put this into that protection conversation. Her responsibility. I mean, he went and did this. I mean, now, certainly as we're listening to a lot of the conversation, and we all kind of say half joking, like, when he looked over and he saw that look, and he was like, feeling like, oh well, I'm going to have to do something, right? And to be, I guess on real reflection, I mean, can we charge her with, that was his reaction So I don't know that it's cool to charge her with his reaction, right? And we can all joke and kind of analyze what we think the rolling of the eyes was and all that kind of stuff. But it's just wow, it's just unfortunate all the way around. And I'm gonna stop and let Joe get in, but I also hope that during this conversation we can get into the handling of this thing from their end, because I think this was a PR disaster. I think that Will's team failed him miserably in this, but
I agree.
We'll get into that a little later.
Yeah, well, I don't see any blame on Jada's part. Mm-hmm. She reacted from the however she feels about her. It's an illness. No matter how one wants to play it, is not as major as X or Y or Z. Mm-hmm. It's what you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. And what it is. And maybe she has, even though she has spoken out about it, she may be very sensitive about it. And it was something because if you look at it, Will laughed initially. Yes. Until like Calvin, and you all know those looks. So in terms, when you get that look, it's like, now, if he had gone up there and grabbed the mic and said, hey, you shouldn't be talking about my wife. And I thought it was even worse, besides the slap, what he said from his seat.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not one for big cursing one in front of women, cursing out in public. So I don't have any curse words, hurt my ears when I hear them, because it's used now in the media and programs and everything else. They use every word except the name of God. So, so that's in terms of the problem. But for me, Tonya, I'm saying, okay, I'm in the Roland Martin school. I say, Chris Rock handled it appropriately, because I don't know myself as a New Yorker if I got slapped in the face, what my reaction would have been. I think Will handled it poorly. But what do we make of the apology from the standpoint he apologized? He's apologizing now. He's doing different things. Should that mitigate what we're talking about here? I've seen others get apologies and boom, it goes off the front page and they bounce back. And we can think of a whole bunch of people, particularly in your media, that in terms of they do certain things, they make the apology, in a couple of months they're back in action. So I'm not condoning. And let me stay here so that I don't be getting the phone calls, Calvin, that folks be saying, Feaster is saying that Will was right. No, I'm not saying that. Right. What I'm saying is, I'm saying categorically that I feel that Will handled it inappropriately. He could have gone up there. If he grabbed the mic, this wouldn't even be a conversation. He said, look, my wife is very sensitive about this particular issue. I don't think that you should be joking about people have illnesses. He would have got a standing ovation from everybody in that audience from the standpoint of defending in that way. But because of the way that he did it, he bears the brunt, or I want to say Will Smith should bear the brunt, not the entire academy of people who are in motion pictures. So that's my take on it.
Hey, let's talk about the PR response just a bit, because, and you brought this up, Calvin, because, and to your point, Attorney Feaster, about the apology, yes, we've heard worse of people, we've seen worse of people, we've seen and heard their apologies, and then life goes on. And how this was kind of orchestrated seemed like the perfect storm, right? So you had a black man who slapped another black man with a black producer for the biggest night in Hollywood, right? And it just seemed as though it hasn't been enough. And there are repercussions that Will is feeling right now that we can't understand in our world, because we don't deal with that kind of money, at least I don't. But there are repercussions that are coming, and I want you to put your attorney hat on for a second. And how would you have advised Will about what to do next? Okay.
Well, let me put on my attorney hat, because after I saw what had occurred, I said to my wife, I said, that's an assault and battery. Yes. And I was waiting for, somebody to come. And that's one because quite frankly, Chris Rock doesn't have to lodge a complaint.
Correct. Correct.
The district attorney, on his independent from the evidence that's right there, could file, because when you have a criminal matter, it's the Commonwealth, or in terms of the state versus is not the individual. The individual is just a witness. And in this case, there's probably 3 million witnesses who could attest to that. So the fact that they don't want to do that, this is just another example of the public relation aspects and the power and et cetera. I can tell you, if, I don't know, Calvin could be a celebrity as well, but for me, if I had done that, right now, I'd be speaking to you with an orange, or orange is the new black. That's what I would be wearing in this instance. I'm not a publicist, but I deal a lot with damage control because I deal with political issues with politicians and communities and et cetera, community groups and things of that nature. I agree with Calvin that in terms of his apology wasn't there. The advice given to him not to apologize to Chris Rock. So there were a lot of things that were done, and it was delayed. I couldn't sit there and, I'm not a publicist or anything like that, but I daggone sure know how to deal with damage control. And there was no damage control that was done there. So the story got legs because of their action. And in terms of fine, he and Jada, let me give him a feature scenario. I would have gone down there, and they said they were going back and forth as to whether they were going to arrest him or not. Someone from the academy should have come out and said, fine, this is not what we represent. That in terms of we don't condone this, and not the fact that now we're not going to take any action this evening because we want to celebrate other folks, et cetera. We will deal with this particular issue. They should have broken and did that piece. That's what I would have suggested that they do. I would have done then from Will's people, I would have probably said, you and Jada need to get out there and get in front of this and be able to say, to make in terms of apology and do what they now are saying. Right before, I came to the show, Tonya, I saw the thing where they said that Jada said that he shouldn't have slapped him. Is that a real statement? Is it fake news? I don't really know. So I don't want to be able to be the one that puts that out there because I haven't been able to confirm it, but at least I have read it, but can I confirm it? No. So I think that, yes, the public relation piece is difficult, and I'm not sure that the damage can be undone. I don't think you can put the toothpaste back in the tube at this present time. I think it's just too far gone, and we have to impress upon those power makers that they can't use this as an example to bar us in the future.
True.
Immediately following the slap, Hollywood icons Denzel Washington, Tyler Perry, and Bradley Cooper all came to Will's aid, while Chris Rock immediately left the show alone. Denzel finally broke his silence talking to TD Jakes, and although he didn't really address it all, here's what he had to say.
There's a saying, when the devil ignores you, then you know you're doing something wrong. Wait a minute, I'm not done now. The devil goes, oh no, leave him alone. Hey, he's my favorite. Don't bother him.
Yeah.
Conversely, when the devil comes at you, maybe it's because you're trying to do something right. And for whatever reason, the devil got a hold of that circumstance, that night. And fortunately, there were people there, not just me, but others in the gap. Tyler Perry came immediately right over there with me, and some prayers, keep it. I don't want to say what we talked about, but there, but for the grace of God, go any of us.
Yeah.
Who are we to condemn? I don't know all the ins and outs of the situation, but I know the only solution was prayer.
I can't help but think that where was the prayer for Chris that evening, right? I mean, all this attention, they swarmed in on Will, but who was there for Chris? Where is his support? Why wasn't the reaction to go to Chris's space or what have you and pray for him. You know what I mean? That was one of the things that really kind of left a bad taste in my mouth.
And along, just talking about the staying on the PR piece of this. One of the things, like I heard Denzel. I mean, I understand exactly what Denzel was saying when that night during the acceptance speech, and when Will, he quoted, he said, what Denzel had told him. And while I understood what was going on, I was like, wow. I'm like, so for those who may not understand, I'm like, does that make Chris in the telling of this story does Chris represent the devil here? And again, that was, and that's where, there were so many PR missteps. And if you notice, like when you go back and you look at the pictures, when all this was happening with Denzel and Tyler Perry, there's a woman who's standing a little bit, she's in the frame, but she's a little off, Will's publicist. And I'm like, given that there was a 40-minute gap, I'm like, how were you all not more well prepared for what he was going to say? I mean, he was the odds-on favorite to win that awards, but whether he was going to win or not, you would have an attorney. You certainly know this, right? Like I'm going to have my acceptance speech, and I'm going to have the speech if I have to concede, right? So how that didn't happen. Just moving a little further, I understand how big a night it was, but given how big this thing was, the optics, I'm like, I didn't want to see Will Smith dancing at the Vanity Fair party the next, later.
Right.
On. Right. I didn't want to see a tweet from the Sun. That's how we do it. Like, and I'm so again, I'm saying the team, like how they didn't shut everything down and say, okay, listen, all the statements are coming through here. No interviews, no statements. Everything comes through here. That was just kind of shocking to me. And again, I mean, this isn't like me. I mean, this is a man who has the machine of the studios behind him, and how they kind of like let this thing, and as Joe said, I mean, we can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, the story is out there already. And then I just want to jump back to one quick thing, because one of the other parts of the story that we've been hearing about and talking a lot about is the alopecia. And like that from the jump, that bothered me. I was like, why are we framing it in this alopecia story? Like, he says he didn't know, I didn't know. And, I was talking the very next day to like this diehard Jada fan. And she was like, well, I mean, she's spoken very publicly about this. And I said, I'm sure she has. I said, but you're assuming that she has the level of celebrity where we're hanging on and listening to everything that she says. And that's not necessarily the case. So I'm not doubting that she's spoken publicly about it, but I don't know that it's reached the ears that some folks say. So, the alopecia story, while I understand that, I just think it's kind of, I'm like, that's not really that. I just don't think that's really the story, or to, just to tap into my very limited, just kind of law and order courtroom. I'm like, we're kind of assuming facts that aren't in evidence, right?
Yeah.
Talk about the alopecia.
Yeah,
and
it was a bad joke.
My legal rap.
It was a bad joke. It was a very bad joke.
Right. Well, see, in terms of Tonya, I again, when you step back from this, like at least I did from my initial reaction, I listened to the joke, and I'm not going to try to do it Chris Rock way, but in terms of in terms of G.I. Jane, in terms of rocking that hairstyle, I just when I looked at it, I said, tell me where the offensive-ness was.
Sure. Yeah.
See, I see it's a difference. Like, and I keep coming back to Trump when he talked about Ted Cruz's wife. He called her names that would have. I remember telling my wife that my only reaction was, would I have slapped him on stage or in the green room? I don't know which one it would have been. So So I looked at it in terms of gravity. So, but beyond that, it happened. Just jokingly, I can tell you this: it increased the price of Chris's tickets when he came to Massachusetts. So it definitely gave him a better payday.
Absolutely,
for sure. So Chris is, he took his slap and went right on to the bank. So
yes, sir.
But that's not really the point of this conversation. I fully understand that. To me, and again, I would like to know how the Academy would have. See, I think when things happen with Black folks, white folks don't know how to handle it.
Correct.
See, for me, my handling of situations are based upon my life experiences, and I can say if A happened, my response is already, maybe it's the way that I think, the way that I handle myself, the way that I do. But if X happens, I'm ready to respond. It's the same thing in terms of my wife. If a situation happens in the street, we've already discussed what her reaction has to be, so I can deal with a situation. I think that, and Calvin said it, the Academy dropped the ball here.
Certainly.
The Academy dropped the ball here, and I think that they were sitting back there once, because I never thought it was something that was staged. I just saw it as he slapped his brother in the face. I didn't see it as part of the act or something like this. It was just in terms of too serious. But I will say, if you look at the thing, Chris Rock took his 30 seconds and regrouped like a pro. I mean, if you want to see a pro in action,
exactly,
Chris Rock did that. So I think your point, Tonya, that everyone jumped to the issue of to Will, because that's because he's he's a actor. That's what it is. Chris is there, but Chris isn't at Will's level in the sense of that. So I think that's where a lot of people went initially, and I just hope that, for me, I'm prepared to give Chris some love. In the sense of that, but I also want to have a conversation with Will to say, yo, man, what's up with that? What were you thinking about when you did that?
Charles Blow, a columnist for the New York Times, had an interesting take on why we just can't get enough of this story.
I saw an expression of toxic masculinity, how men too often respond to passions with violence and call it love. How they cloak their viciousness in valor, how they profess to protect the vulnerable with violence when in fact they're animated by their own fragility. My take is just one take from my own perspective and lived experience. Other reasonable people, some very smart people, can have different perspectives. And that is how the slap became a psychological test for society, and therefore a sensation.
I was, and this was on CBS Sunday Morning, which is one of my favorite shows, and he did a good job with this commentary. One of the things that we, and you talked a little bit about this, Attorney Feaster, at the top of the show, is the amount of media attention given to this. And a lot of people are now discussing this, it was the story that dominated at least 48, I will say 72 hours after the Oscars. But we're still hearing it. It's still making an appearance at least some point during the day. I have my news on 24/7 when I'm down here. Why? And I'll start with you, Calvin. Why was this such a huge story?
Well, because it was so unprecedented. Number one, it involved so much celebrity. Now we're certainly, and Joe certainly referenced it a few times. We're kind of used to, over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, we've been used to seeing the kind of the politicians kind of get in the dirt. So I don't think that surprises us anymore. This was this would now, you're talking about the Oscars, not just for movies. This is the biggest night in entertainment, period. And we just weren't used to seeing, again, there's no playbook for this. It's totally unprecedented. And I think, so I think that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is that this has sparked, and again, it's certainly in the Black community and Black media, we're also getting a chance to kind of discuss and dissect emotion in Black men, which is just something that we don't do and we stay away from for any number of reasons. And I'm not saying that we have it right. I'm not saying that we're getting it right now, but I think that's a big thing. We're finally getting a chance to discuss that. And I love, certainly like Chris Rock, one of the things I've been fascinated with since this thing happened was that I've not heard a single, wow, he was kind of a punk for taking it like that, and I would have done this and that and the other thing. It was like that. Right. That was never touched, and that just showed me such an evolution in our thinking and our maturity to kind of assess something, right? But so I think that's a part of it. I think we're dealing with, and Charles Blow talked about it a little bit. I mean, but we're dealing with this is really a lot of heavy baggage for a lot of things. I mean, the slap just kind of started it, but all of these conversations around what's appropriate. I mean, we haven't really gotten into it heavy, but this protecting women narrative, right? I mean, there's so much that this has brought up. So I think that's one of the reasons why this thing has the legs that it has.
Well, I think if I might join this just very, very quickly, I think it has legs. I think that a lot of people tuned into the Grammys because they wanted to see, they got popcorn and their soda, and they were waiting for, they wanted to see whether something like this was going to happen for the Grammys. Our society, to me, gets to the lowest of the low. What do we start newscasts with? Everything bad, fires, murders, disasters.
It leads.
So that's what it was. So this was, look at Chris Rock second show here, and I may be jumping ahead, I can't help it. His second show here, I think his tickets went up 5 times the price of the original ticket, in the sense because people wanted to go there to hear whether he was going to talk about this particular issue. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have spent a dime in order to do that. So it's a matter of the way we deal with media. Today we deal with things that are streamed, the things that we watch. I think our society is looking for all the negatives and to use those as props in order to do so. I think the story here was this has stayed in the news because there's something negative that happened to as Charles said, to a high-powered person, and this story is going to play out. This is now almost 2 weeks?
Yeah, it'll be 2 weeks.
And it's still being talked about. So I think that's what it is that sensationalism that we have come as a society to salivate on.
Right.
We know that Chris Rock resigned from the Academy. We know that he has projects that are in, I'm sorry, Will Smith. Will Smith resigned from the Academy. We know that he has projects that are in jeopardy right now, we can say. There's even talk about him going into therapy. There's a lot of talk around him. We know that Chris Rock is still performing. He has not addressed this publicly, only to say that he is still processing it. Where do we go from here, gentlemen? Where do we go from here with the narrative of Black men and their supporting one another and uplifting one another? Where do we go from here?
I don't think that Chris Rock, I don't think he's going to address it. I really don't think that he's going to address it. I really think that Will, after he's made the apology, needs to leave it alone and see if this modulates over time. I think Chris Rock has been upstanding about this, and I think there are going to be others in the media who are going to constantly be throwing that question before him, and it'll be interesting to see in a couple of days how he responds. And I'm going to put my thumb on the scale here and say he's going to say, I have no comment. That issue is behind me in terms of I'm moving on. Hey, I hope to host the Oscars next year.
He probably will. They'll probably invite him to do that.
Let's see if Feaster's prognostication can be correct about the terms, because that's how I would do it. Mm-hmm. That's how I would do it, because I would continue to take the high road.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
I would.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I would say that I would agree. I do think that he's going to address it, but I don't think it's going to be any time in the present. I think it's going to, that might show up in a show later on, and I think from a here's the thing. he's riding so high now. I'm like, bro, leave it alone. Don't touch it, right? I'm like, because the only thing you can do now is put a pin in the balloon. I'm like, leave it alone. It can, it'll come up later and that'll be fine, right? And I loved how he said, he's still processing it, but take the time. Like right now, the kind of world sentiment is on his side. Like it couldn't be better. So I'm like, bro, just leave it alone and just let it ride. And then, to go to your question, Tony, like, where do we go? I mean, if the way that it's going to get off the front page, I'm like, just let it get something. Listen, it's been almost 2 weeks. Something is going to get back and take this off of the front page, right? I mean, we'll still deal with it in pockets, but it won't continue to be this huge story. But Chris, I would, I'm like, bro, if I was advising him, I'm like, just let it ride now. Like, what could you possibly say? I'm like, everyone is saying whatever you could say. Everyone's saying it for you right now, right? I'm like, you let it go. So.
I thank you both, gentlemen, for being on the show today and adding your perspectives to this conversation. I'm going to end this discussion the way it began, with a closing thought from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar saying, quote, "I just want this to be a cautionary tale for others, not to romanticize or glorify bad behavior. And I want Smith to be the man who really protects others by admitting the harm he's done to others." Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Remember, you can listen to past episodes of the PowerPLAY Show wherever you subscribe to podcasts, including iTunes, iHeartRadio, Pandora Podcasts, and now Amazon Music. You can also watch us on YouTube. Simply search the Hull Bay Productions Media channel and be sure to subscribe so you always know when we're live. And we air each Saturday at 5 p.m. on BroncoiRadio.com. So tune into a new episode of the PowerPLAY Show each Thursday, wherever you subscribe to podcasts, or on our YouTube channel, or simply visit us at thepowerplayshow.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Tonya McGrath. Be kind, and thank you for tuning in.